Google Workspaces has just become much better for AI agents because they've released a Rust CLI tool that lets your agent interact with any Google Workspace API. So read files from Drive, send emails, and even create slides, all built from the ground up for AI agents, meaning they use as little tokens as possible and dynamically create commands at runtime so the APIs are always up to date. But now, with a bigger company like Google creating a CLI for what was previously and still is an MCP server, what does that mean for the future of MCP? Hit subscribe and let's find out. Last month, I made a video about Playwright making a CLI for what was previously an MCP server. Now it looks like Google Workspaces have done the same thing and people on Twitter are going crazy for it. It's a CLI tool built by Justin, who's written a blog post going through everything he did to make it specifically for agents, which we'll talk about later. But it does have over 100 skills you can download from Skills SH, which of course has made the G-Man very happy. But before we jump into what it can do, we need to go through the setup, because if we know anything about Google Cloud related tools, it's not that straightforward. Let me show you. First, and most importantly, you'll need access to the Google Cloud console. You can make a new project or use an existing one. I made a new one. Then you'll need to have the G-Cloud CLI installed, which you can do with Brew if you're on a Mac. And then with the Google Workspace CLI installed, you'll have to run this command to go through the setup, which is pretty self-explanatory. Use your email for auth, select a GCP project or set one up, and then choose the APIs you want access to. Then once you're done for this stage, you'll have to go to API and Services, Credentials, and create a new auth client ID, which I believe can be for any application type. I've done web, but I'm sure it will work with desktop because all you need is this client ID and secret. Then after you've done that, the next stage is where things get a bit tricky. Because after running this command, you'll have to select your OAuth scope. For this demo, I selected everything, which isn't ideal, but I was just testing the API. Then you'll get this huge URL to authenticate in your browser. Now first, you need to make sure there aren't any typos in this because you might get some errors. But you'll need to make note of the port after localhost, which in my case is 51065, and then back in the Cloud console, click on API and Services, OAuth consent screen, then click on Clients, choose your web client, and then down here where it says Authorize Redirect URIs, change this to that port number, so 51065, and then, we're not quite done yet, go to Audience, scroll down, and add your email address here if it's not already. Now, if you already have a published app, you won't have this issue. But because I'm just testing the API, I'm using it in test mode, so I need to add my email and the email of all the users I want to use the CLI over here. Now with that done, you can copy this URL and follow the steps to configure this CLI. And once you're done, you should have a status of success. If you don't see the screen, then wait for a few seconds and try again, because it does take a while to register the redirect URI. This whole process, so just the setup, took me the longest amount of time to figure out, which goes to show I don't use Google Cloud tools that often. But once you're done, you should see your details here, meaning the fun can really begin. Check this out. Now I'm going to start simple and ask Claude to give me information about my latest 10 emails. Hopefully there's nothing sensitive in there. And using the GWS CLI, it's given me information about each email with from, subject, date, and labels. And we can see for doing this task, it's just use 9% of the overall context, purely because there are no MCP tools here. Most of the context has been used by the messages. Okay, let's try something else. I'm going to ask Claude to write me a draft email with the subject of I love Claude and a body with a nice poem. Again, it uses the GWS CLI, writes some Python using bash, and now that it's finished, we can see I have a new draft email here written by Claude. Let me zoom in a bit. That contains an email with a poem saying how much I love Claude. Now, there's something really interesting about the way Claude uses the GWS CLI. If we take a look at the commands that it's done in the past, we can see here that there are lots of subcommands and there's a params flag with JSON inside it. What's really interesting about this is that if I, as a human, wanted to do the same thing by typing in GWS help to have a look at all the subcommands, I don't get all of them. I get a handful, and if I want to dive deeper into a specific command, I'd have to use help to get even more information about it and keep doing that over and over again. But the agent is able to get this information really quickly and even know the exact params to use to get the right data. I mean, look at this. I typed in the prompt over here, it used help once and was able to figure out all this just from that. Now, we're going to go into a bit more detail on how it's able to do that, but we can see here that the CLI help section outlines the usage and mentions service, resource, and sub-resource. So we can see service down here, And if we want more information, we could also look at GWS schema with service, resource, and method. Okay, let's try one more thing. I'm going to ask Claude to create a new slides document with one slide containing the title of Claude Cat and 4 other slides containing images of cats. Again, he uses the GWS CLI, asking for help, then digs into help for the slides and presentations commands. And now it's finished making our presentation. Let's take a look at it in the browser. Here it is. You can see I've already made a test with Claude Dogs, but let's try this one. And we have the title Claude Cat with a subtitle, a plurified collection with 5 slides containing images of cats. This is really cool, and we've only used 15% of the context, so we could keep going on and on doing different things. Like here, I've created a Google Sheets document containing the population of each of the US states with a total at the bottom, and even scheduled events in my calendar. Now you may have noticed I did all of this without installing any Google Workspace specific skills, but the project does have lots of skills available containing helpers, personas, and recipes for more complex actions like blocking focus time and rescheduling a meeting. So how did Justin get this to work so well? First, he prioritized nested JSON, which is difficult for humans to read, but much easier for agents. He also made the documentation queryable at runtime, which we kind of went through earlier, but this schema section over here makes it so that if something updates or the agent enters a wrong parameter, it knows exactly where to go to check what the correct one is without any confusion. The parameters or fields can also be used to reduce the amount of information that comes back from the API. So the agent can limit the information to just what it needs instead of getting some extra information it doesn't need, which reduces the amount of tokens that are used. And of course, he uses skills for agent-specific guidance, which I didn't use in the demo, but they provide more information than the agent can get from using the help flag. So it's clear, MCP servers are out, skills and CLIs are in, right? Well, not quite, because with MCPs, the agent can just call functions directly instead of having to construct shell commands and pass JSON, which is what the CLI does. MCP tools are also better for chaining complex steps, and of course, you don't need a terminal to run them, which is why the Google Workspace CLI does have an MCP option. However, CLIs do use way less tokens, even with the tool search tool enabled. They're portable, meaning they can work with any agent harness or without an agent harness if you don't want to use one. And it's easy to reproduce the commands independently for debugging. So I guess it really depends on your use case. But I did have a few issues when using the CLI, like the generated URLs containing typos, which I have no idea how that happened. The whole redirect URL localhost port thing took me a while to figure out. I'm not sure if that's specific to Google Cloud tools or just the CLI, but it wasn't fun. And I did have an issue with the tokens not updating correctly that I even created a GitHub issue for. Well, Claude wrote it for me. I actually didn't write any of it. But for a project that's less than a week old, with more than 10k stars on GitHub, it already has a promising future ahead of it. And speaking of promising future, if you ever wanted to create an Electron app powered by Bun, so you get the speed and you get the small bundle size, then check out this video I've made on Electro Bun that shows you how to use it for a simple Vite project.